Commerce Department says shoppers pulled back on spending in the month of December. U.S. retail sales came in flat over the holiday shopping season amid concerns over a slowing job market and new uncertainty around global trade. Stock market reacting to the numbers, with the S&P and NASDAQ finishing the day lower. The Dow did close, though, at a new all-time high. And another one bites the dust. Eddie Bauer is filing for bankruptcy. The sportswear company says it's restructuring its business, blaming declining sales for the decision. This marks the third time that Eddie Bauer has filed for bankruptcy protection. The company says most of its nearly 180 stores will remain open, but it will wind down certain locations across the U.S. and Canada. Let's go to some new research. It shows it's getting harder for Americans to stay out of debt. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York says that U.S. household debt is now at a record high $8.8 trillion. This report says debt totals for credit cards, student loans, auto loans, all hitting record highs, which brings us to a series we call In This Economy. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says that President Trump's new tariffs cost the average U.S. household $1,000 last year. That number could increase to $1,300 this year if existing tariffs stay in place. President Trump credits tariffs for bringing in revenue for the federal government, but this research calls them a tax on American families. This comes at a time when many households are already frustrated with the high cost of living. As we head toward the midterms, the latest Quinnipiac polling shows that 56% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, while 39% approve. Joining me now is Erica York, the Vice President of Federal Tax Policy at the Tax Foundation, who worked on that research. Erica, thanks so much for joining us. You, in this report, call the president's tariffs a tax on American households. Explain what you mean by that.
So tariffs are a form of tax. They're applied when a business or a person based in the United States imports a good, and they pay the foreign producer for the cost of the good, and they remit the tariff payment to the U.S. government. The research that we have now shows that about 90 to 96% of the burden of tariffs is passing through to the U.S. economy. So that means it's American households, workers, and businesses who are bearing the burden of the president's tariff increases.
The president has said that this brings in a lot of money for the government, and the White House will point to this argument that inflation has not spiked as much as some economists had predicted because of the tariffs. There are places where prices have not gone up quite as badly as many had thought. What do you make of that?
I think the inflation question is unfortunately a really big distraction because tariffs can go up and costs can go up without inflation going up. If you think of tariffs as a relative price increase, that's what happens. You might have to pay more for shoes if a tariff is applied to shoes, and that means you have less money to pay elsewhere. So headline inflation may not change much, but your burden went up because the costs that you personally face for goods that have tariffs imposed on them has risen. We've seen partial pass-through to consumer prices in the data, but even if tariffs don't fully pass through to consumer prices, that doesn't mean the burden is gone. That means it becomes a hidden tax burden. Businesses have higher costs, and they deal with that by reducing wage increases or slowing down on hiring. So at the end of the day, whether it's through consumer price increases or a hidden tax increase that hurts the labor market, it's really Americans who are paying this tax increase.
Doesn't just have to show up in the price you pay at the store. It can also be in how much money you take home in your paycheck, what your cost of living is there. Talk to us a little bit, Erica, about which households in your research are hit kind of hardest by these tariffs so far.
Tariffs are a bit of a regressive tax, which means when you look at them as a share of a household's income, they impose a bigger burden on lower and middle income households than they do the wealthiest households. And that's largely because when you're a lower income or middle income household, you spend most of your money. You don't have a lot left over to save. And so more of your income gets hit with tariffs. And that's why it can create a bigger pinch for those who are working really hard to get by, and not as much of a burden for those who are already well off.
How do you kind of see this playing out? I know that the estimate is that this cost per household could be $1,300 this year. That's even more than people already, ended up costing last year.
Yeah, the tariffs were not in effect for the full 2025 calendar year. They were on again, off again, rates changed, exemptions were added. And so that's why that average tax burden for calendar year 2025 is a bit lower. If the tariffs remain in place for the entire calendar year in 2026, the burden will rise. There's still a lot of uncertainty with that, though, because of course there's a Supreme Court case pending against the bulk of the tariffs, which means they could be overruled, and the president may have to find other ways to impose tariffs. So, in addition to the tax burden itself, people also face a lot of uncertainty in their economic decision making because of the volatility of the policies.
Uncertainty has definitely been a word associated with these tariffs. Erica York, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.